One of the interesting things I've discovered about Fremont petroglyphs is that the clear majority of them have a southward orientation. They face the sun. One could call the petroglyphs a form of sun writing. In some instances, light and shadow seem to be part of their design. One of my principal hypotheses for the sun-filled glyph is that it uses sunlight and shadow as part of its construction. It was in May of 2017 that I noticed a shadow slowly moving over it, cast by a small protrusion of rock on the front rock face and here highlighted in green. For this rock protrusion to cast a shadow, the sun must be high overhead and above the bluff. This means that it is only in the summer months near noontime that this shadow occurs. I surmise that the shadow might in some way help track time towards the summer solstice. Moreover, just to the left of the sun-filled glyph is another patch of rock that holds the last petroglyphic markings on the bluff. And this petroglyphic panel shows counting dots and marking lines, as well as an image of a foot and of a walking man. Sunlight also plays significantly on this glyph, and a stark shadow is cast upon it as the sun sets in the summer months. This time-lapse image shows the shadow on the sun-filled glyph already fully formed and retracting as the sun moves west. The shadow disappears by about 2 p.m., and by late afternoon, the shadow on the other petroglyph forms and slowly moves across it, eating up the light. Did the Fremont watch where shadows were cast on the rock face through the year and then place some of their petroglyphs where shadows would mark for them the right time of their ritual calendar year? To answer this question, I contacted the Utah Rock Art Research Association, or URARA for short, a nonprofit organization whose goal is to help preserve and record ancient petroglyphs in the state of Utah. I met with Tim Sweeney and Darlene Corner of URARA, who were my field guides as they led me to several solar petroglyphs marked throughout the Uinta Basin in eastern Utah that have been observed by URARA members. I will share just a few of these sites. In Ashley Creek, there were several solar candidates, but one petroglyph deserves our attention. It is of two spirals linked together to form what might look like a pair of spectacles. To the right of this glyph is a small ridge of rock, part of which has been visibly pecked away and marked in purple on this image. At noontime, on the days of equinox, this ridge casts a shadow, horizontally, right through the center of these spirals, so that the top half remains in shadow and the bottom is illuminated in sunlight. The fact that the rock ridge has been purposefully shaped shows that this shadow alignment is intentional. Further down Ashley Creek is a remarkable rock formation. A slot formed by the fracture of a large boulder frames a rock bluff on the western horizon. A long rock-like beam extends from one half of this rock and has numerous geoformed petroglyphs carved on it. Right underneath the rock beam is an anthropomorphic figure. If one stands in front of this petroglyph and looks down the axis of the rock beam, it points directly at a notch in the opposing rock bluff. This is where the sun sets at the summer solstice. Further, several petroglyphs on this rock are curious. These shapes, variously called ladders, cornstalks, or spears, have 29 notches on them, and this corresponds to a lunar month. Such numeric synchronicities are not coincidental. Out by Bush Creek, we observed another unique petroglyph that shared similar features. Confirmed viewing by URARA shows that a shaft of sunlight emerges from the rock to the left and dissects this figure right through the middle. There is a small dot inscribed to the lower right. The tip of the sun dagger hits this dot at sunset of summer solstice. And this petroglyph is surely a calendar implement. It is carved on the ground and surrounded by a semicircular rock ridge naturally formed atop a boulder. The figures in this petroglyph are familiar with a pair of anthropomorphic figures who stand below a pecdot and above a spiral. The spiral itself is divided with 5 incisions in the carving. The rock ridge casts a shadow on the spiral through the year and appears to mark the summer solstice and cross-quarter days. A few miles past Brush Creek, a sandstone ridge bears this cross-hatched circular petroglyph. The 2 lines emerging from its top end in corn sprouts, and there is a small hole drilled into its center. As one looks at the circle, there are 12 demarcated sections similar to our sun-filled petroglyph. A small stick inserted into the center produces a gnomon, casting a shadow. 2 other holes above the circular motif could also hold gnomons. A study done by Urara members show that a stick just 2 inches in length will produce a calendric shadow through the course of the year. Now is a good time to introduce another petroglyph panel in Fremont Indian State Park that also caught my attention. I call it the Walking Man petroglyph because, as this image clearly shows, there is a Fremont Indian dressed in some sort of ceremonial garb holding a ritual implement in front of him as he walks on the counting dots at his feet. This petroglyph caught my attention because of its counting dots, and here on the top row are a series of 37 dots, which is the identical number of dots on the sun-filled glyph. In fact, I quickly theorized that these 2 petroglyph panels were related. I took infrared shots of each glyph, converted them to black and white, and heightened the contrast to see as much of the imagery on each glyph. Indeed, there is an older layer of carvings on the sun-filled glyph. What I discovered absolutely amazed me. In the background of the sun-filled glyph is a quadrated area identical to the Walking Man glyph. Also, there is a man with a phallus walking on the dots of the sun-filled glyph, and this corresponds to the Walking Man on the other petroglyph. This also seems to indicate that the 37 dots are part of a fertility ritual cycle, and I am guessing is associated with their agricultural growing season. Further, both have what appears to be a corn tassel motif shown in pink, though they are inverted to each other, which might be significant. As we look at both glyphs, we also see the same counting dots in the same 7 wavy lines, and both have deeply pecked dots integral to their form. As much of this is very faded on the sun-filled glyph, I think I can rightly hypothesize that the earliest form of this petroglyph was carved over to make the sun-filled design, while the original was transferred over to the Walking Man petroglyph site and remade there, perhaps as part of an upgrade to the ritual design of the culture. It should also be noted that there are faded glyphs on the Walking Man site that are indecipherable. Both sites have been reused by the Fremont. While not unheard of, it is highly unusual, and the unusual must pique our attention. In the least, reusing a petroglyph tells us that the rock face itself is very important to its creators. Another interesting thing about these petroglyphs is their location. They are literally the petroglyph panels at the extreme end of the rock bluff opposing Five Finger Ridge. They are the bookends to the entire parade of petroglyphs. I have a suspicion that both are tracking summer solstice, but that one is being ritually used for the winter solstice as well. I will have more to say on that later. Speaking of the unusual, it is only at the Walking Man site along this bluff that we find north-facing petroglyphs. Here is the Walking Man rock. The Walking Man glyph is on the south side with a series of birds' feet and sheep images oriented to the southwest. And then, quite by surprise, facing northwest is a couple of wavy lines and 2 circles carved in the rock. It's not much, but it is such a radical departure of the sun-riding mystique of south-facing orientation that it demands a our attention. Of course, sun and shadow also may be used on these north-facing glyphs. Instead of a shadow running across them, I posed the question, when will the first sunlight of the year hit them at sunrise? In order for that to occur, the sun has to be at its northern end of its cycle near the summer solstice. Again, I hypothesize that the sunlight will not hit these glyphs until sunrise near the summer solstice. Here I am, 3 weeks before the solstice, taking pictures of the sunrise on the horizon at this rock. Quite remarkably, the sun actually rises just north of the rock, but because the glyphs are oriented northwest, the sunlight never hits them. To do that, the sun needs to be a few more degrees to the north. In other words, at summer solstice. Fremont petroglyphs are not scribblings. At least in some instances, they are sacred writings wed to light and shadow. They are a form of sun writing. Indeed, it is probable that there are other alignments of the petroglyphs that no one will ever be aware of, because they do not line up with the most obvious solar days of the year, that is, on the equinoxes and solstices. If the Fremont had some important ritual dealing with agriculture, biological maturation, cultural concerns, or religious initiations that fell on odd days unfamiliar with our own calendar concerns, they could just as easily inscribe a petroglyph that meets with light or shadow on that day or week of the year as part of their ritual calendar. It is impossible to know. What we can know is that in the Fremont petroglyphs, we are not dealing with rambling musings or pre-modern art. We're dealing with a cosmovision utterly foreign to our own, that saw the sun, moon, and stars as an integral weaving to the fabric of the cosmos and of daily life. We're dealing with an oral and sacred way of life that also had its high demands of the intellect, but that rationalized its metaphysical speculations firmly within the observable feats of nature.